Good morning, Metro. Thank you. Thank you. You know, the person, all I had to do was be born. The person who did the real work is my mom, who's here in the room with us. So happy anniversary of giving birth to her. Good morning, everyone. In addition to so many exciting things going on this Sunday, it's also Oscars Sunday. And that feels pretty fitting that I would fall on Transfiguration Sunday because when you think about it, the story that, thank you, Bob, he just read so beautifully, is kind of dramatic. It's kind of dramatic what happens on that mountaintop. And in general, there's something very mystical and dramatic about being at the top of a mountain. Many know that feeling of watching the sunset on a mountaintop, and right, it can take your breath away. The Bible also seems to think there's something special about mountaintops. Noah's Ark rested on top of a mountain in Genesis. The 10 Commandments were revealed on Mount Sinai. And of course, there's Jesus' famous Sermon on the Mount in the book of Matthew. Mountaintops serve to represent places of change, growth, and spiritual revelation. One could make the argument today that the world is in serious need of some kind of mountaintop experience, an experience that promotes some form of change, growth, and spiritual revelation. If a mountaintop is the true representation of reaching spiritual enlightenment and divine truth, we must surely be quite far from the top of the mountain at this moment. This has been said, this is Transfiguration Sunday. And the word transfiguration is defined as the change from one state to a more beautiful or spiritual state. So that's what the transfiguration is about, a witnessing of spiritual change and revelation. To notice something that maybe you already kind of knew before become more clear than it already was. In the Transfiguration story, Jesus takes Peter, John, and James with him on a journey to the top of a mountain. When their hike to the top is complete, Jesus sits down to pray, and something pretty wild happens. It's kind of like a scene straight out of a science fiction movie. Jesus' face changes in appearance while his clothes become dazzling white. Additionally, the long-dead prophets, Moses and Elijah, appear on the mountain, and they begin to have a conversation with the newly transformed Jesus. And to put this whole interaction into context, this is like the gathering of the Hall of Fame of biblical prophets. This would be like peak Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan, and LeBron James. I know our theater crowd is appreciating all the athletic references. This would be like all three of them coming together to make a new basketball team. This is a meeting of the all-time greats. We have Moses, who talked to God through a burning bush, led his people out of slavery in Egypt and wandered the desert for 40 years, and would eventually bring them to the long-awaited promised land just to die right inside of it. You've got Elijah, who spends his whole life preaching against an idolatrous government who ignores all of his warnings about God's wrath. He has his own dramatic exit when he ascends into heaven on a flaming chariot. Both prophets, too, have the unfortunate opportunity to know what it means to suffer under their government, to be persecuted, and to be rejected by their own people. They are both equally as familiar with suffering as they are dramatic deaths. There are no better people to discuss Jesus' own impending future. Having just witnessed an event so unusual and seemingly impossible, it's hard to say exactly what would have been going on in the minds of these disciples, these everyday, ordinary people. But when Moses and Elijah prepare to depart, Peter doesn't seem quite ready to let the moment end. He turns toward Jesus and insists that they set up 3 campsites for each of them. But Peter is unable to even get the full sentence out of his mouth before he is interrupted by the actual voice of God. All 3 of them are so overcome at this moment that they collapse in fear. But Jesus tells them to get up and keep going. They do not stay. They continue their journey back down. In this story, it's easy to think of Peter as some fumbling fool whose suggestion to set up camp for the night is just a product of shock and confusion. But I think Peter knows exactly what he's saying, because imagine yourself in his shoes. His friend, teacher, and mentor just led him to this journey to a mountaintop, this place known for tranquility and peace. But Jesus is very clear about his predictions of a future that will be anything but peaceful. They know the journey back down the mountain ahead of them will be much harder than anything they've faced before. It is a journey which will be full of pain and hardships. This person, Jesus, whom he'd given up everything to go and follow, will soon be gone in a tragic and horrific manner. The journey down the mountain will signal the beginning of the end of Jesus' earthly ministry. When you think about it in this sense, Peter's apprehension starts to make a lot more sense. With the knowledge of the hardships that await them at the bottom, who wouldn't elect to stay on top of the mountain? Real life is full of examples like this, where we have this great epiphany moment, but we're not really quite sure what to actually do with that epiphany. Imagine if we were to look at life in the metaphor of a mountaintop sunset. They can be beautiful, they can take your breath away, and they can also bring some clarity that was previously missing. Much like the supernatural event that takes place in this story, sometimes life has a way of hitting us with these shocking, life-altering revelations, a witnessing of Transfiguration. Speaking of the Oscars, one of the Oscar-nominated movies this year is the first act of Wicked. And, spoiler alert coming, the movie ends with its own mountaintop-esque epiphany. The story's main character, Elphaba, has a less than convenient truth revealed to her when she is finally granted the opportunity to meet the wizard, the godlike figure that she's idolized her entire life. Much to her dismay, she realizes shortly into her introduction that the wonderful Wizard of Oz is actually a spectacular fraud. Not only does he lack the great wisdom and magic that he claims to possess, but it turns out his power relies solely on scapegoating Oz's most vulnerable citizens. This is Elphaba's mountaintop transfiguration. This is the moment where the truth is laid out clearly in front of her, and now she's left with a choice: to stay comfortable at the top of this mountain or to make the uncomfortable journey back down. Working with the wizard, in many ways, would be the long-awaited reprieve from what has thus been a lonely and painful life for Elphaba. Mocked and cast out by her family and for her community for looking and acting out of the ordinary, working with the most powerful man in Oz might finally bring the love and validation that she has so longed for but been constantly denied. In the final moments of the movie, as Elphaba is trying to break away and leave the wizard's palace of excess behind, her good friend Glinda tries to get her to stay and reminds her of all that she would be giving up. She says, don't forget, it's not too late to change your mind, right? You could work with the wizard and you could have all that you've ever wanted and even more. And Elphaba, as clear-eyed and determined as ever, looks at her friend and says, I know, but I don't want it, and I can't want it anymore. While Glinda stays comfortable in the power and privilege that comes with staying on the mountaintop, Elphaba makes the harder journey back down, guided by the truth she has just witnessed, and guided with a determination to be an advocate to others who, like her, have been ridiculed and harmed for simply being who they are. She leaves her old life behind and disappears into the night sky. In both major and minor ways, we've all had one or more of these epiphanies in our lives. Maybe it's that day you realize it's time to quit the job that you've not been happy in, to quit the habit that's been personally destructive to you, to change the relationship dynamic that's not working for you anymore, to pick up and move from the place that's not making you happy. We all have these moments where we realize truths. The moments themselves can be the easy part. In the same way, watching the sunset over a mountain landscape is the easiest part of the hiker's journey. It's when the sun disappears and you must stumble your way back down the mountain in the darkness. That's when the real work begins. It's one thing to realize you need to make a major change to your life, but it's a much bigger task to do the difficult work and have the hard conversations that makes that change happen. As pretty and peaceful as mountaintops are, we do not live on mountaintops. The realities of our lives exist on much less peaceful terrain. If we want to honor the true gift and beauty that we see on the top of the mountain, we've got to be able to do the less romantic work that happens when you come back down onto flat ground. Mountaintop revelations can also exist on much wider realms than just in our personal lives. While our society and our individual communities aren't always as educated or aware as we'd like them to be, we have collectively witnessed a lot of mountaintop transfigurations. We've learned hard truths. Many of us have been educated and had our eyes open to different collective forms of injustice that have occurred and continue to occur every day. While these revelations aren't always very pleasant to witness, they are once again the easier part of the journey. Most of us can say confidently that it's an understatement that our society has a pretty problematic past when it comes in terms of how we've treated other people. And of course, a quick reading of today's situation and reality, you'll quickly realize that we're not short on problems, chaos, or suffering. You look around, as we've even mentioned earlier in the service, you'll find thousands of hardworking civil servants being fired with no warning, people having their scholarships, their basic needs stripped away. Many of in our congregation have named over the last few weeks concern for themselves and loved ones who fall into this category. You can look around and find $880 billion being taken away from Medicaid, which benefits our most vulnerable people, so that the ultra-rich can pay less in taxes. I know families in Kentucky and North Carolina this week that are terrified at the possibility of their special needs children having their therapy and their special education taken away. You can look around and find trans people's identity being attacked and actually erased, women's rights being stripped away. We have immigrants in our country who are being plucked out of their communities and taken to foreign countries they've never been to, where they don't have access to basic human rights. All that goes to say, it is an understatement to say that there's a lot going on. It feels like a new fear is realized every time you turn around. And sometimes it can be easy to absolve ourselves from any responsibility to take a stand against this, to take a stand against all the injustices that we're witnessing. It's easy to say that we are merely powerless cogs in a very powerful machine, and that there's not anything we can do about it. But the truth is that we sometimes follow Jesus up to the top of the mountain. We see the Transfiguration with our own eyes, and we decide, it may be at least for the night, that it's easier to set up camp at the top than it is to take the rough and scary journey back down. The journey down is risky, and often there's not a lot of tangible rewards. I mean, look at Elphaba. For her bravery and her moral actions, she'd be rewarded with forever being reviled and scorned as the Wicked Witch by her fellow citizens of Oz, while her friend Glinda is beloved in the eyes of her people for her acts of complacency. In real life, there's unfortunately plenty of examples of the system vilifying individuals who were trying to do the right thing. Last week marked the 60th anniversary of the assassination of Malcolm X, the revolutionary civil rights figure, who was very controversial in his time. The day after his death, our local newspaper, the New York Times, ran an editorial in which the author referred to him as an extraordinary and twisted man, turning many true gifts to evil purpose, and referred to his short 39 years of life as strangely and pitifully wasted because he did not seek to fit into society or into the life of his own people. This Sunday marks the beginning of Women's History Month, and I probably don't have to explain to at least half of the room the ways in which women have been and continue to be painted as things like angry or hysterical or other words that probably wouldn't be appropriate to say while we're recording, for simply standing up for causes of justice that they believe in. Given all of this information, I think many of us are understandably able to identify with Peter's perspective. But, thankfully, when Peter's fear and anxiety started to hold him back from what needed to be done, the voice of God came down to guide him to go forward with the work ahead. They made the journey down the mountain and continued the revolutionary ministry that Jesus had started. And although the ultimate end of this journey would be a difficult one, there were many great things that happened along the way. Upon coming down from the mountain, Jesus performs many more great acts. He would heal illnesses, call truth to political and religious power, and teach lessons of love, kindness, and hospitality. These profoundly transformative deeds, along with many others, would never have happened if the group had elected to stay on the mountain. The journey up was easy, the journey down was hard, but unbelievably necessary. As a community, we do a pretty good job of staying educated and informed about all that's going on in the world, even when it's really hard to hear. But I also think we're at a point where we can collectively simply acknowledge the fact that being knowledgeable about injustice isn't enough. As Reverend Theo Harris reminded us a couple weeks ago, it's not enough to be angry. We must organize and unite around our anger. It isn't enough to simply know that the cost of housing in our city is an injustice. We need to get involved in initiative to fix it. Maybe such as becoming a part of a campaign to get our next mayoral candidate to commit to a rent freeze. Thank you, Michael Pfeiffer. In our book club this week, we talked about how it wasn't enough to just be educated and worried about the rising threat of Christian nationalism in our country and its goal to strip us of our civil and religious liberties. We need to find out about local organizations who are working to end it and figure out ways that we can support them. The epiphany has already happened, and now it's time that the real work must begin. I cannot stand here in front of you today and give a pretty ending to this message. I cannot pretend that this same fear and apprehension that I've named this morning, I can't pretend that this isn't something that I don't struggle with and continue to struggle with regularly. I often catch myself setting up camp instead of moving forward. I am silent when I need to speak up. I speak in moments when really I should be listening. I discover the truth and I fail to act upon it. There can, however, be a little good news hidden in this text for all of us. Going down the mountain, like I said, is hard, and sometimes we choose not to go. But just because we chose to stay at the top of the mountain today doesn't mean we can't then choose to go down tomorrow. Sometimes we start to make our way down and we encounter bumps along the way. There are obstacles that get in our paths. We pass people who convince us we're going the wrong direction, and sometimes we are simply too exhausted to make it all the way down. We may not get all the way to the bottom today, but we can certainly keep putting one foot in front of the other. We at Metro have witnessed a lot of transfigurations on mountaintops. Through God's grace, we have been shown truths which tell us, among other things, that it doesn't matter what the political climate is that we live in, because we know that everyone, of every identity, of every race, nationality, gender, sexuality, income level, education level, citizenship status, whatever category you construct or make up, all of these people are a beloved creation of God. For us, coming down the mountain means living our lives in a way that indicates we know this truth. It means speaking out against injustice when it is more convenient to be quiet. It is knowing that everyone is deserving of our inclusivity and hospitality. Sometimes it means sitting and listening to people, even in moments where we feel like our voice is more important. Sometimes it means loving or advocating for ourselves when we've been made to believe that our lives don't matter as much as others. Like I said, my journey down has not been as steady or fast-paced as it should have been, and I still have a pretty long way to go. But as Jesus, Peter, James, and John didn't do it alone, I hope I don't do it alone either. So today, I commit to continuing my journey, and I invite you, my beloved community, to come along with me. So let's get going. Amen.